Good evening, everybody, and welcome to February's George Talk, which is rather special for a number of reasons, not least that it's our patron talking about his life with his father on Jura. It's a great pleasure to welcome so many members and so many invitees. I'm delighted that over 60 people were invited by members to join us tonight. And I know from the list that we have a lot of people who are joining us for a George Talk for the first time, both very recent as well as members who've been with us for a while. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our patron, Richard Blair, who will now give you his talk.
Right. Let's see where we are. Good evening, everybody. Let me just get rid of some of this stuff. Right. Let me just try a quick slide change. Yes, that goes all well. Okay, good evening, everybody, or good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining me tonight. I would like to just have a chat with you. I'm not going to do a sort of George Orwell did this on Tuesday afternoon of the 23rd of March, 1946 type talk. I'm going to talk generally about life as I experienced it, I suppose, as I remember it, living at Barnhill on Jura. And so there will be obviously one or two sort of dates and things popping it down again. And I shall refer to Orwell as my father for this talk. So let's get going. Barnhill, a most ungetatable place. So this was his description of Barnhill. And it was quite a difficult place to get to after the war. He reckoned it would take you about 2 days to get there. And he wrote many letters and all the same instructions to everybody. This is a letter which nobody has seen before because it's in my possession. It is in fact to Brenda Salkeld. And as you can see, he writes to her, he's hoping that she's going to come up and stay. Leave 8 a.m. Glasgow, join the boat at Jura, 12 noon arrived at East Tarbert, take a bus to West Tarbert, bus runs in conjunction with the boat, join boat at West Tarbert, 3 p.m. about, arrive Jura, hired car to Ardlasser, where we will meet you. And so this is how it actually sort of went along. There is the route from Jura, and as you can see, I've drawn in the line to East Loch Tarbert, where you got off the first steamer. You took a bus to West Loch Tarbert, and then you went to Craighouse, where you took the hired car, and off you went up to about there. The rest you had to walk, well, about there, because that was the end of the tarred road. The rest you walked up to Barnhill thus. So just to show you how it's done, there is a very elegant steamer. They were always called steamers. This is the St. Columba. And they were always called steamers, even after the war when they're all converted to motor. But in the West Coast, they were the steamers. And the St. Columba was actually a steamer, but a very elegant vessel built in 1912, I believe, and ran till the early 50s. And I recall her, she was a lovely old boat. My father said, you should always go third class. There's first class and third class. He said there was absolutely no difference in the food, which was pretty disgusting. But in first class, it was silver service. Once you got to West Loch Tarbert, you then picked up this vessel, and I apologize for the quality of some of these slides. I've had to expand them slightly so you can actually see them. This is another boat called a motor vessel called the Lochiel, and she did the West Loch Tarbert to Jura, either run for, from 1939, I believe, until the early 60s. She ended up as a restaurant boat down in Bristol, actually. Ella and I actually saw her back in the mid-90s. Then she was scrapped. So there we have her. There's another one here. She's rather a nice little boat. And everything was taken on board, and everything had to be hoisted out by crane onto the piers. So your car was picked up and slung gently through the air and dumped down on the pier. So everything went. So that was everything. All the goods and everything was transported thus. And of course, we arrived at Craig House. Now that was at the bottom end of Jura, as you'll have noticed. And for those who have been to Jura, of course, you will recognize it. So from there, you took the car and you drove, or you were driven up to the only road. This is halfway up, and this is another East Loch Tarbert. There are lots of Tarberts in the West Coast. This one is, in fact, was where the Astors, that was the Astors house, and the Astors estate, midway up Jura, and then we carried on up. And this is Ardlasser. This was the Ardlasser house, which belonged to the Fletchers, Robin and Margie Fletcher, who were our landlords. And I have to correct a mistake that Bernard Crick made in a life and was perpetuated in the complete works. He said that Robin Fletcher owned or inherited the estate. It was not so. Margie Fletcher, his wife, inherited the estate. It had been two estates at one time. Her father had bought the Ardlasser part from the Astors. The top part was called Barnhill, funny enough, it's now called Barnhill. Came from a Campbell family. I'm not quite sure which one, but they bought it from the Campbells and combined it as the Ardlasser estate, as it was in 1946 when we arrived. So that tidies up that problem. And so this was the first view you would get of Barnhill as you came up the long, lonely track, and you then drop down to the house. This is the original photograph. You can always tell if it's a genuine photograph of Barnhill or rather an Orwellian genuine photograph, because it's got 3 chimneys. A lot of the subsequent photographs that you see have only got 2. The middle one blew off, I believe, in the 50s. So here we are. We've landed at Barnhill. He arrived sometime in the spring of 1946, May time. And then later on, I think in beginning of July, I arrived. He went back down to London to pick me up with Susan Watson, my nanny, and we arrived up here. Looking after the house by this time was Avril, Orwell's younger sister, and she was looking after his house, and of course subsequently it became my aunt, but that of course came later on. We have lots of visitors when we're here. As you can see, it's pretty rough. He actually managed to, he started the garden when he arrived, and started to plant salad vegetables and soft fruits. And I arrived in, about July time with my nanny, and we had various people staying, all sorts of people that first year. And this is a photograph, and again, no one's seen it. It's actually was sent to me by the daughter of one of my father's secretaries, Sally McKeown. And I assume, and I'm not sure, whether this is not Susan Watson or whether it's Sally McKeown herself. That, of course, is me in the middle there. And the daughter, which was Susan. It gets very confusing because Sally McKeown, daughter, was called Susan as well as Susan Watson. You will see in the background, in fact, there is the back end of a dinghy, and a gentleman there who is my father. This was a dinghy that figured in our little adventures, which I shall explain to you later on, following year. So we have in the house quite a lot of people. We have Sally McKeown, we have Susan Watson. We also have, that was a van. I'm not sure, this was not the lorry, quote unquote, that my father got from George Cobb, but I'm not absolutely certain. That there's a lot of confusion as to exactly who bought what. Playing in the backyard, again, everyone smoked. And I still don't know whether that's Susan Watson or Sally McKeown. Presumably that's her daughter, and that's myself there. Now, we did have stock. You can see we've got some geese, and that gentleman there, again, the back of the photograph suggests it was Paul Potts. Now, Paul Potts was a Canadian-educated poet. He was born and brought up in this country, but moved to Canada. And Paul Potts was a friend of my father's, a tolerated friend of my father's. He was not tolerated at Barnhill by the ladies. They hated the sight of him. He was a pain in the backside, if you'll pardon the expression. He didn't stay for very long, because one morning, to light the fire, I'm not quite sure whether it was Av or whether it was Susan Watson, she found some paper, scrap paper, to start the fire with. Apparently it was the beginning of a novel that Paul Potts was writing. And so he disappeared at high speed in the middle of the night in high dudgeon. So that got rid of him. I think that's the relief of everybody else in the house. I'm not sure what my father thought. He probably didn't give it much thought anyway. And unfortunately, as well, Susan Watson fell out with with Avril for all sorts of reasons. The basic reason was that Avril always called her brother Eric, and Susan Watson insisted on calling him George. Well, in the end, Eric won, and Susan left for home, and she never came back again. What I thought of it all, I've no idea. But I'm as happy as Larry in this atmosphere, because I'm looked after. It's a lovely place to be, and nothing to worry about. Just go out the back door, and off I go, playing here and there. My father was, in fact, quite concerned about snakes. He seemed to have a thing about snakes, and Jura did have quite a lot of adders. Not desperately venomous, but could make you feel a bit ill. So his first thoughts were, I must get in some proper trousers, not for what kind of bloody trousers I wore prior to that, but anyway, some proper trousers and boots, proper boots, farm boots, he said. Well, farm boots, in fact, of course, fairly heavy devices, and as you grow older, they're what they call in Scotland tackety boots. These are boots that have a upturned sole with studs in them. But I don't think I quite had those yet. So here we are, first summer, 1946, quite pleasant weather. Of an evening, we would go fishing. We had lobster pots, so we used to catch lobsters. So our diet was actually very good. Compared with London and rationing, of course, we had rationing up in Jura like everybody else. But we could supplement our diet with rabbits, fish, lobsters, bits of venison that we used to get from Ardlassa from time to time. So I think we probably lived quite well. And so there we are, we carried on through the summer. My father did no work. He made a point of not doing any work at all. He wanted to get his garden dug over and planted out. So I think we had, by and large, sort of quite a lot of visitors coming one way, during the summer. But towards the end of 1946, we in fact, all three of us, that is my father, Avril, and myself, went back down to Canonbury Square for the winter. I think I'm just trying to see when we left in October of 1946. So we were there in Canonbury Square right through the winter, and of course into the very, very bad winter of 1947, which not many of you will remember. Some of you will, actually. I won't go into detail, but it was damn cold. So we returned to Barnhill in about April of 1947. Obviously, the weather had improved. And my father was relatively fit. He had wintered in London quite well. And of course, immediately started work on writing 1984. I just simply carried on playing outside. It was, as I said before, it was a great place. 20,000 odd acres you could walk over or roam over. And I think, according to my father's letters, I just simply went outside and played quite happily. So let's go on into 1947. This was a year of several things happening. The first incident was when I was watching my father making a toy from him. This photograph was not taken at Barnhill, by the way. This was taken at Canonbury Square. But the point is that he used to make lots of toys for me, and you can see a little head down the bottom left-hand corner there of me probably interfering if I could get away with it. He then, so the point was, he was making me a toy, and I was standing on a chair in his bedroom and fell over, cracked my head in a jug, split my head open, and was taken into the bathroom. This is the bathroom at Barnhill, which has, by the way, has not changed. That is the bathroom of today, and I don't think it had changed very much from 1947, where I was stood by the sink and bled profusely, and I had to have next day I was taken down to the village at Ardlasser and had a couple of stitches put in my head. Nowadays, of course, you'd probably have to go to A&E and have all sorts of tests done, that you had, got a hemorrhage in your brain or something. But anyway, that's how life was in 1947. So this was the one that one of my incidents that happened there. I also got measles, so I was confined to quarters for some time. And a lot of the arable work at the beginning of, well, during 1946, early 47, a lot of the arable work, which there was some about 16 odd acres of arable land that went with Barnhill, was some of the work was done by the workers from Ardlasser. But in the spring, and I say spring, I mean April, May, there came to Jura a soldier, well, an ex-army lieutenant by the name of Bill Dunn, who had lost his leg during the war. Incidentally, he lost his leg on the 14th of May, 1944, which was the day I was born. Whether there's any correlation in that, I'm not sure. But anyway, he had come to Jura to learn about farming. He was actually staying with the people in the farm called Knuchruch, about a mile above Barnhill, and the people there was Katie and Donald Darragh, and he lived with them. Then he very quickly came down to Barnhill and introduced himself after a little while. And my father said, well, look, I'm not fit enough to do the farming work here. Perhaps you would like to join us and do the arable land, and we can get some cattle, we get some sheep. And this, in fact, is what we did. One of the people who used to come to stay with us quite regularly was, of course, Sir Richard Rees, a great friend of my father's. And he appears, I'm going through the domestic diaries of my father. He tells you all about his gardening, but he doesn't tell you very much about who arrives. He just says that there are people staying in the house. He doesn't actually specify who they are. So you have to kind of work out who it might have been. But Richard Rees certainly turns up a lot of the time at Barnhill. he's quite a common theme throughout our time there. So we have Bill Dunn now, who moves into Barnhill, and he does the arable work for us. And so we carry on during the year. And what else did we have here? By the way, well, let's have a look. There we have Avril and Bill Dunn. That was probably photographed about 1948, 1949. It's not, again, not a very good photograph. That's taken about a few years later. This was when we'd moved off the island, so the scruffy little lurch at the front here has now grown a little bit. Interestingly, in conjunction with Corryvreckan, if you pose the question, who first swam Corryvreckan, the first answer that comes up is Bill Dunn. He swam that in the year of the disabled, 1983. He had to wait until Avril had died. She would never let him. He wanted to do it, and she wouldn't let him do it. So when she died in 1979, and Jane Morgan, his Avril's niece, came to live at the farm that we moved to, she let him swim Corryvreckan. So that's what he did. Anyway, that's by the by. What else do we have? Well, this was the year, of course, was the wreckage, the shipwreck in Corryvreckan that happened. So we spent a whole weekend over on the other side of Jura, a place called Glengarrisdale, where there was a little shepherd's hut. That actually has been tarted up. That was taken a few years ago. It was a bit run down when we went there, and we had a long weekend of rest and recreation, swimming and shooting rabbits, and generally having a good time. There was myself, my father, Avril, and my three cousins, Jane, Henry, and Lucy. I have to say, sadly, only yesterday I got a message from Jane Morgan to say that Henry had died. He'd been unwell for a number of months. So there were only two left now of the three children of Marjorie Dakin. That was my father's older sister. So there was Jane, who is hale and hearty, but lives in Keswick, and of course now her sister Lucy, and that's the two that were left. Henry was in the middle. So there was those three, myself, my father, Avril. Bill, I think, had stayed behind to do some work. Anyway, at the end of on the Sunday afternoon, we leave Glengarrisdale. I think Jane and Avril walk over the hill to go back to Barnhill. I, with my father, Lucy, and Henry, take the boat back up through the Gulf of Corryvreckan to go back round the other side to Barnhill. Now, the problem was that my father was, not only did he misread the tide table, he had made up the tide table himself. So he had, it was a double chance of getting it wrong. And we arrived back up in Corryvreckan when the tide was still flowing. And we got ourselves into real trouble. We lost the outboard. It got pulled off the back of the dinghy. And Henry was commanded by my father to take to the oars, because the problem was that the tide was still running as a flood tide. Now, excuse me, the thing about the tides in the west of Scotland is that they run from south to north and east to west when they hit an obstruction. So contrary to what you might thought, the incoming tide was going actually out through the Gulf of Corryvreckan, excuse me. Out through the Gulf of Corryvreckan. And it was lots of little whirlpools and overfalls, and was really quite dangerous. So Henry took to the oars, managed to get the boat, the little dinghy, it's a 12-foot dinghy, jumped ashore where you can, where you can see it's smooth and CBD, jumped ashore, pulled the boat up, and the swell, there's always a swell running, and apparently it was quite a big swell that particular day. the swell receded, the boat slid down, turned upside down, and there we go. I'm sitting on my father's knee, and we ended up underneath the boat. I think Lucy had already got out, so Lucy and Henry were ashore, and we were then able to splutter our way out, and you know, the whole thing was okay. But of course, it could have turned very nasty. Very, very, as you can see, the sea is swirling around there. The tide would have been running past this rock quite swiftly. My father could have banged his head. Who knows what could have happened. These sort of accidents can turn into a tragedy in the twinkling of an eye. I'm just looking, oh my God, looking at the time. So we need to crack on. So we were stuck in this little rock, but fortunately a lobster fisherman came through, picked us up, took us off, and took us back round to Barnhill. Well, not Barnhill, he took us round to, I think, yes, there we go. So there is Glengarrisdale, that's where we were. We were shipwrecked up here. We were taken back to there and then had to walk back to Barnhill, thus barefooted, because we'd lost everything, all of our clothes and blankets and whatever food we had, was lost when the dinghy turned up, side down. So anyway, there we go. Once we were back, well, when we walked back to Barnhill, where Av and Bill said, well, where have you been? To which we replied, or my father replied, shipwrecked. And that was as far as the conversation went, which is fairly low key. I believe, in fact, it was reported in the Scottish Daily Express. I think somebody from the fishing boat who was coming through with this lobster fisherman must have reported the incident. So there we go. It didn't do my father any good, I tell you. It's knocked him back quite badly. One of the other things that happened in the same year, I learnt two things. I learnt two antisocial aspects. One was to smoke and the other one was to swear. The smoking came from the former, my father, who was a very heavy smoker, and Bill Dunn probably taught me a few swear words when he was there. The smoking incident, of course, was when I found an old pipe and filled it up with my father's cigarette ends from the fireplace in the dining room, tried to get it lit. I have told this story before. In fact, I wasn't sick immediately. I couldn't get the pipe going. So later on in the afternoon, when I think Bill was milking a cow, I went through to what we call the cowshed, or what in Scotland is called the byre, and thought I'd be the grown-up man, and took out this pipe and got a light and started to puff away. That is when I was very, very sick. And as a certain Scottish comedian said, it's funny how when people are sick, they've always had carrots for lunch. But anyway, that's that. So there we are. I gave up smoking for about 12, 13 years until I got to school. And I started again. In fact, I haven't now smoked for about 35, 40 years. So fortunately. We're now into 1947. What we had here was we had lots of people staying. We've had, I'm just looking at the list here, Richard Rees. There's an arrow dislocates her shoulder in the autumn. God, that was a pantomime and a half. We took her down to the Ardlasser and the doctor came up and he couldn't put her shoulder back in. She was in terrible pain. We had to take her over to Creenham, which is on the, some of you will know where Creenham is, of course, and I will try and show you where it is. It's in fact there. So on the little boat, we took her across to see a doctor from Lochgilphead, actually eventually managed to get her sorted out. And, but during that year, we in fact, I think, no, it came later. It's we had Jane, Lucy, and Henry with here in June. We had Dr. Gwen O'Shaughnessy. Now, Dr. Gwen O'Shaughnessy is, of course, was mother to my cousin Catherine. And she came to Jura once or twice when we were there. Always enjoyed her company, enjoyed anybody's company, in fact, living at Barnhill. It was quite a lonely place, I suppose. I mean, I didn't see, generally speaking, when, of course, we didn't have visitors, there was just Avril, Bill, and my father. My father would be working most of the time in his bedroom, typing, 1984. And, but obviously in the evenings, we would go out fishing and catch lobsters. And we caught quite a lot of lobsters. I see in the notes here that we took 6 dozen lobsters down to Ardnasser to sell. So we did quite well. Avril was really the mainstay of Barnhill, you know. She was the one who held us all together. She was a wonderful cook, not a fancy cook, but she was a very good cook. And she was very good guardian to me. I think she took to me very well, and always did, and always had done. And because my father did his best to try and make sure that he and I bonded properly, but he was aware, of course, that he wasn't very well. He had problems with his lungs. And during 1947, the late 47, he actually became quite ill. And so the decision was taken that he should go into hospital, and he went to the hospital outside Glasgow, East Kilbride, called Hairmyres, where he spent the rest of, certainly the end of 1947, right through till June, July of 1948. And that is where he was given streptomycin to see if he could deal with his tuberculosis. This was streptomycin, which had to be imported from the States, and it had to be under license. And this is where David Astor stepped in, persuaded the Home Office or the Home Secretary to import it, and to be given to my father. Unfortunately, he was allergic to penicillin or streptomycin, and they had to stop the treatment halfway through. I believe the treatment, in fact, what was left of it was then dispensed to various people, of which, very quickly, I will say, the great doyen of Scottish rugby football commentary, Bill McLaren, was apparently a recipient of some of this streptomycin. But that, I digress. And if I digress anymore, we'll never get out of here. He's there until June of 1948. And of course, I went through to see him, I think about once or twice to Hairmyres. But otherwise, I'm quite happy sitting at home in the house at Barnhill. By this time, Bill has acquired a tractor. And it is, if I can find it, called a British Anzani, iron horse. And actually, it was a jolly good little device. This, obviously, you can see, it was taken at some function a few years ago, a collection of vintage agricultural machinery. But this was a jolly good little tractor, and you could plow with it. It had a trailer, and Bill used it for cultivating the 16 acres of arable land that we had, on which we grew oats, we grew potatoes, we cut some of the fields for hay, and it was a smashing little thing. Now, of course, I was absolutely fascinated by anything mechanical, and I would fiddle and faff around with it, and I managed to lift up the bonnet, folded it forward, and then forgot to prop it up. So it immediately came down and banged me on the head. I had a bump the size of a goose egg, probably lots of tears. But I was fascinated by farm machinery. And so I'm looking at here, the notes here, see who else turned up. Ah, yes. Well, one of the things, actually, just before I go on, Bill dug a lot of drains, open drains, in which you put clay tiles, 3-inch by 12-inch long clay tiles to drain the fields, because the fields are pretty boggy at Barnhill and very sour. You had to put a lot of lime in the soil to get the crops to grow. It was soil was all right, but said it was had a very high pH, low pH, acid soil. And he'd laid out he ordered all these tiles, these clay tiles, hundreds of them, and had laid them out ready to be put into the drains that he had dug so laboriously. I found probably a small hammer and then proceeded to go and tap each one at a time and break it, each tile. I don't think he was very impressed. In fact, I think he wanted to put my head in a bucket of water. But my father thought the whole thing was rather funny. Presumably he had paid for the damn thing, so I had to go and buy some more. Yes, one of the people, our visitors, was a very good friend of my father's, Eileen, Lydia Jackson, who was a Russian. Her original name was Elzevita Fenn, who had written several books, but she'd studied child psychology at same college that my mother was at Oxford. And I think my cousin Catherine said that she was the most formidable woman that she'd ever met. Somebody who should have been a child psychologist, she could not think of would make anything like a child psychologist. But however, she stayed for about 6 days apparently. Very strange lady. We now come towards the end of my father as 1948. Well, he's getting his way through Animal Farm, 1984, and he has now pretty much finished it. And really, towards the end of 1948, he realizes that his health has simply collapsed, and arrangements were made that he should, in fact, have to leave the island and go down to Gloucestershire to a place called the Cranham Sanatorium. And this is what he did. He worked at the end of, the beginning of January of 1949. He left Jura for what was the last time. And just very quickly, I had done some trips to London where he wanted me to have a formal photograph. So that's with me about the age of 4 or 5, 4 I think. I'll get rid of that. 1948, we had a lot of people staying to do the harvest. And this was the tent that became the sort of extra 4th, 5th, 6th bedroom. And as you can see there on the left there is the garden that he's dug over and was becoming very, very, it was yielding a lot of vegetables and potatoes and soft fruit. And that actually, as you can now there you see, is the farmhouse taken in the 50s. But you can see the area that he dug over, or more or less dug over, it's fenced in there, that was his garden. So 1949, early January 1949, he leaves Jura for the last time, goes down to Cranham Sanatorium in Gloucestershire, and during the summer, I'm taken down to a place called Whiteways. It's a little village, an anarchist village, not far from Cranham. Whiteways, the reason I went there was the wife of Bernard Richards, who had taken all the photographs in 1946, publicity photographs. Apparently she had connections there, and I lived with her, or stayed with a family called Wolf, and used to go and see my father at Cranham Sanatorium off and on weekends. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, but that was really the most of 1949. He, of course, went into hospital, into UCL, and when was it, autumn of 1949, and of course, married Sonia Brunel in October of 1949. January of 1950, I go down to see him briefly. I leave on January the 15th to go back home with Avril. And of course, on the 21st of January, he died. She had to turn around and go back down to help arrange for the funeral. I presumably stayed with Bill at Barnhill. And so we've now come to 1950, and we have the problem of what do we do now? So just prior to, just 1940, actually 1948, I missed out a little bit in the sense that we, apart from having the little dinghies, which were proved to be too small for what for our purpose, Bill had purchased another boat, a 26-foot whaler that had come from an American destroyer. Had a little Kelvin engine, which was much more suitable for our needs, and we were able to commute between Barnhill and Ardlasser and to get our groceries, and it was a much better way of doing things. So we're now back to 1950. We're living at Barnhill. There was Bill, Avril, and myself, and the decision was taken, in fact, that we would have to leave. It's the weekend of a lovely calm day. And this is the view that my father and I had on the back of the car. This is the track from Barnhill down to Ardlasser. Actually, I was looking the other way around, but nevertheless, it was a very rough track, and we were forever getting stuck, falling off the road, getting stuck in the ditch, having a puncture. It was always just a nightmare trying to get backwards and forwards. In fact, Richard Rees, I think, bought us an ex-Army laureate towards the end, and which kind of helped a little bit. But so the decision is taken. We have to leave Barnhill, and at the end of 1950, well, the autumn of 1950, we move off, and I go down to Rufford to stay with Humphrey Dakin, who was Marjorie's husband. Humphrey was the father of Henry, Lucy, and Jane. I stay down in Rufford with Avril. Bill goes off to stay with a friend, and he looks for a farm. And this is the farm that he found, not very far away from Barnhill. It's only about 4 or 5 miles as the crow flies. It's called Gascaran. It's in Loch Craignish, and this is where I now live until I leave home back in the early 60s. So Avril and Bill, of course, got married at the beginning of 1951, and that's when we moved into this house, this farm, in 1951. So finally, when the great day comes, and Corryvreckan is looking for its due, having not got me in 1947, when it will get its due someday, and I will go down the plug hole, but not yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rick. That was excellent. Can you unshare the screen, please?
Yeah. I would do if I can get out of it. Trying to.
If you go up to the top, it should say in red, unshare. Jobs are good. Very good. Well, to give Rick a little bit of a break before we go to what I expect will be many questions, let me tell you a little bit about what's planned for next month. Next month is when Sylvia Topp's biography of Eileen, Orwell's first wife, the book will be republished as a paperback, and we will have a little talk, her and I, and allow plenty of time for you to ask questions. So I'll give her the opportunity to answer a few questions to get things going, but she much prefers to answer questions than deliver a peroration of any sort. Next month is one of the 3 events this year. This one, that one, and one in November when Rebecca Solnit will be talking about her book, which is due to be published in the autumn, about connecting Orwell's love of nature to sequences in the book. So his love of nature is not superficial. It also it gets embedded into his work. So those three events will be ones where we will ask members to invite their guests, as we have tonight, and it's been wonderful to see so many of you. If you've enjoyed it tonight, of course, we'll be delighted if you'd like to join. I know that Ben put up the link a little while earlier on the notes, but it's very easy to join on the website now. So if you would like to ask questions, if you use the facility, if you put all the click on the bottom of your screen, unless you're in Apple, in case it might be on the top, for the participants list, you will see when you've got the participants list up, an opportunity to raise hand, and people have already done that now. So excellent. So Masha, if you'd like to ask your question, please, if you'd unmute yourself first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. It was wonderful. I thought I knew everything about your stay and your father's stay in Barnhill, but there were so many new things. So thank you very much. But I wanted to ask you maybe to tell us in detail this very moving episode when you were leaving Jura, when Orwell was leaving Jura for the last time, and Avril went away, and the two of you stayed in the car. I think it's just very revealing of his attitude to you and just generally of your relationship then.
Well, the relationship, of course, was very, very loving relationship, father-son. And he was very, very aware of the problem, of course, of bonding with me, bearing in mind, of course, that he was infectious. And that was the one thing that, troubled him, I think, that he spent a lot of time. I mean, when he went to Hairmars, he was there for 7 months. When he went, of course, when he went down to Cranham, I hardly saw him at all. So I don't suppose I'd really seen him for more than 2-3 years, well, a couple of years, I suppose, in total. So I think his love for me was probably very deep. I suppose my love would have been in the sense that, he was my father, but there were all sorts of other people around about who were looking after me, and all looked after me extremely well. I have to make it quite clear that although we were not a huggy, kissy sort of family, nevertheless, I was looked after extremely well, and there was never any doubt that I was not wanted by anybody.
What I meant, sorry to expand, just when Avril went to get another car and you were staying in the back of the car, the two of you.
Yes, sorry.
When you got, I meant this episode.
Yes, well, this was the episode, well, it's when we were leaving Jura for the last time. Yes, well, the inevitable happened, of course, as the damn car fell into the ditch. It was on a afternoon heading down to Ardlassa to where he was going to stay for the night in order to catch the steamer the following day. And fortunately, well, Avondale then had to go back to Barnhill, pick up the truck, this army truck, come back, and we had fallen into the ditch in about one of the few places, or the only place, where they could actually get past the stricken car and was able to tow it back out, tow it out, and thus continue the journey. So it was very late. So I was sitting in the back of the car, obviously with my father, and I think I do recall, but I don't know, I can't swear to it, that I think he had some sweets, and he just was telling me little stories, because I think he could make up stories as he went along. And that, I think, is the last time I really remember him particularly. I remember seeing him in Cranham, but that was probably a very poignant point in the whole saga, was sitting in the back of the car with him. Of course, he wouldn't have realized that this was his last journey, and I wouldn't have known either, but it was the last journey that he ever made.
Thank you. David Craig, please.
Yes, thank you, Richard, for an excellent talk, and I loved seeing the picture also of George Copp's formerly owned lorry. I believe it's a Fordson. They go for about £8,000 now in the classic car market. But it was wonderful to see that. Richard, on a more serious note, I mean, obviously, George Orwell had chosen to invest a tremendous amount of time and energy in you as a child, and how many children would sort of envy such an upbringing today of father that was very devoted and able to make toys with them, etc. and things. I mean, these are years that you never get back, of course, with your children. Were you aware by the time that you'd left Barnhill of what sort of any tentative arrangements that were being made for your schooling? Obviously, you're coming up to the age where you would start attending school full time. Was it Orwell's intention that you'd attend like a local primary school or something?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, time was the constraint tonight, in the sense that there were lots of other things I could probably have slipped in. When he died, and we came back to Barnhill for 1950. I went down to the village school at a place called Inverlasser, which was down little village below Ardlasser, and I would go down and on a Monday morning, Bill would take me down in the boat, and I would stay with the postmistress at Inverlasser for the week, and then he would come and pick me up again on the Friday afternoon and go back to Barnhill. And that's how I started my school life. My father wanted me to go to St. Paul's as a day boy in London. And but apart from that, I don't think he had any other ideas particularly. Was that the total question, or was it?
Yes. I mean, essentially, obviously, one of the most remote places that you could think about in Scotland, and I just wondered what sort of schooling was available for you.
Well, I suppose. Well, the schooling available, of course, was the village school. Then you would have had to have gone elsewhere. What he had in mind, or what happened, was that when he went to University College London, he had they had to make a decision if he was to survive. Bearing in mind he had just remarried Sonia Brunel. Had he survived and gone to Switzerland to recuperate, I would have lived with him. He would have gone to somewhere warm during the winter and would have gone back to Barnhill for the summer. And I would have gone to, I think it was St. Paul's, as you put me down, or wasn't St. Paul's, it was somewhere else now. I can't think what it was.
Westminster, perhaps?
Westminster, I think it was Westminster. Yes, thank you. Your brain fade here. But in the event, he said, should I die, Avril would look after me. And of course, she was by this time engaged to Bill Dunn, and they whatever arrangements they made, I would go along with them. And of course, it happened. In fact, we moved to the mainland. I went to the village school in Craignish, and then I went to a school outside Edinburgh. And then I left home pretty much by 1963. I'd left home 63, 64.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Nigel Bryant, please. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I've unmuted. Thank you very much, Richard, for a personal view. Excellent, thank you. Also, just to mention, I don't know whether other people saw it, but on the television a few days ago, one of the celebrities, I can't remember which one, was travelling around the coast of Scotland and pointed out where you and your father had your nautical expedition. which was very timely, I thought. But what I wanted to ask you, growing up in Jura with what sounds almost idyllic, with fishing and traipsing around with your boots, at what point did you think that your father was special? At what point were you on Jura? When you thought he was,
yes,
or was it later?
Interesting question, Nigel. It's something that grows on you, I think, as I got older. Because I mean, I was only 5.5 when he died, so I hadn't really clocked it by then. And it was really only when I went to school and prep school that it started to dawn on me, because obviously his reputation was growing as I was growing up as a schoolboy. And so that's when, I mean, I first read Animal Farm, I think, when I was 11, and then 1984 when I was 13. So it was something I've just grown with. Okay. So it's just been a natural progression, organic progression. By the way, Joanna Lumley was the nice
Joanna
lady.
Lumley. How could I possibly forget Joanna Lumley? I apologise to her, but it was.
By the way, just Darcy Bustle will be doing exactly the same thing tomorrow night.
Apparently so. Yeah, there's a plethora of celebrities travelling around Scotland, and they're tripping over each other. Anyway, thank you very much for your reply.
That's right.
I don't know who'll be the boatman for Darcy, but Sandy Campbell was the boatman for Joanna Lumley, and Sandy is one of the two guys who ferry our members to Jura and round the island and up to Barnhill when we have our visits to Barnhill every other year when COVID doesn't intervene.
I have been out there on a rib, and it is scary, so I'm not sure I'd want to be out there in a little wooden dinghy. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. The next questioner is Pam Schwartz, please. Where are we?
Are
you still with us, Pam?
She needs to unmute.
Yes. Pam, can you unmute, please?
Nearly there.
There we are.
Sorry, I apologise. I'm on my phone.
Hi, Pam.
Not at all.
Right, hi. What I want to say, first of all, is thank you so much. That's really interesting. A friend of ours was talking about this the other night, and it's proved very, very interesting. The question I have actually is a bit obscure, really, and it's to ask you, do you know why this house building is called Barnhill? And I'll just explain why I'm asking. I'm very familiar with Moss Side, Manchester, and there's a street there that a name was taken away, and the local authority gave it Barnhill, and it makes no sense to the area. And I just thought maybe is there some reason? Do you know why it's called Barnhill?
I don't. In fact, it wasn't called Barnhill. The Barnhill originally had a Gaelic name, which was totally unpronounceable.
Yeah.
It was built in about in the mid 1800s, I believe.
Right.
So it's not necessarily very old, but it was a very substantial house and buildings for that part of the world. So no, the answer to your question is why it was changed to Barnhill, I couldn't say. That would be a question I'd have to ask the Fletchers, I guess.
Oh, all right. Okay, just to very quickly say, the street in Moss Side was called Barton Street, and it's where Mary Barton, Elizabeth Gaskell's novel, is actually written about. Yes. And so this very appropriate name was taken away in about the early 70s, and this name, Barnhill Street, Barnhill Street, was given to the street. So it's intriguing that another building has been given this name. Bit of Googling needed, thank you.
The house I have up in Scotland is also called Barnhill.
Right. Did you choose that, perhaps?
I did. It was given us a very odd East Coast name. I chose Barnhill because I can't remember what the hell I did, why it was. I think the farmer across the way thought it looked like a bit of a barn, so I thought, all right, then I'll call it Barnhill. Be quiet. That's but I didn't actually call it Barnhill because of Barnhill, surprisingly. But of course, everyone probably thinks that I did. So there we go. By the way, just out of interest, when I talk about Corryvreckan, that is the anglicized pronunciation of Corryvreckan. If it's the Gaelic pronunciation, it's Corryvreckan, with a great emphasis on the second syllable.
Right.
So there you go. There's another piece of useless information for you.
To work with. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Stuart, please. Stuart Van.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. It's a fantastic chat. I'm a little bit, it's just a question. Avril, his sister, like Eileen, your mother, seems now to have, well, Eileen particularly is getting some credit in some respects of the influence that she played on your father. And Avril seems to have had a very important role, both in your father's life and also yours, of course, and also to Barnhill. And I was wondering, you know, how significant was that? Because she seems to have played a major role, certainly in your life. Obviously she's played a massive role, but she, you know, did your father rely on her? What was the relationship she had with him? Because that's something that doesn't seem to come out in any of the biographies, you know, the actual, how can I put it, mechanic, or not the mechanics, but the, you know,
the relationship.
Yes.
Yes, she has been rather sidelined. She was very, very important to my father. She was absolutely crucial to his existence at Barnhill. Without her, he wouldn't have managed. There's no question about it. Much as he thought he could have managed, but without her, he would have been lost. And she has been rather sidelined. I did a few years ago write a long essay on called my Aunt Avril, which can be found on the website. I feel I ought to go back and do it more justice someday. But yes, she had a very good relationship with her brother. They were very, very close as families of those days were. You know, the middle class didn't show their emotions terribly much.
Not touchy-feely.
Not a lot of hugging and kissing went on, but she was devoted to him, and he to her. There's no question about it. More so, perhaps, than maybe Marjorie, his older sister, because when my father and Avril were growing up on Henley, she would always was the one who would try and trail around behind him. My father and of course Jacinta Bunniker, but he would let her come along. He didn't chase her away too often. I think he was very protective of her. So there was a very, very good relationship between the two of them, and you're quite right, she has been sidelined by biographers, and it ought to be put right.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Richard Hallmark, please.
Where's he hiding? I can see him.
Hello, can you?
Yes, hi, Richard.
Oh, Richard, yeah,
Hello.
I can see you. I'd like to see you. Yes, good evening to you.
Well, hi, Richard. Thank you very much for spending this evening with us. Can I come back to the question about schooling? Now, obviously, by the time your father died, you would not really have been aware of issues and questions about kinds of schools that were good or not good, and progressive or not progressive, and so on. And presumably, the sisters would not have shared your father's ideas about society, socialism, but people were surely aware of his attitudes. He'd written, not least of all, a famous essay about his own experiences at school. He was talking to you, you understood, or you understood from what you told since, that he was talking about you going to a private school in London, like St Paul's, if not actually that one. And you did go to private schools.
I did.
Was there any sense of a conflict or a problem in dealing with kind of bringing you up in the way that your father would have wanted, which is an idea that some people would have had in those circumstances?
Well, yes, it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it, Richard? Because here was a man, of course, having been educated at Eton, although he was a King's scholar, he was, in essence, a middle class, or a product of the middle class society. And he was hardwired to it, even though he wanted to call himself an old-fashioned socialist, and he had socialist attitudes. The story of my private education was, in fact, Avril didn't want me to go private at all. She wanted me, when we moved to the mainland, to Craignish, she wanted me to go to urban high school. But Bill Dunn, her husband, had been privately educated, or say privately, at a public school outside Edinburgh, a school called Loretto. And he persuaded her that that would be the school that I should go to. There was sufficient funds for me to go. My father had put aside money for my education, and he thought that the school that he went to, and his brother, would be better than urban high school. Whether it would have been or not is, of course, a moot point.
Right.
Very good.
So that was the reason why I ended up with private education, but it was nothing to do with my father, as it happened.
Can I just do one little follow-up? Vernon Richards, in his essay, I don't know whether you actually remember Vernon, but he wrote this perceptive little essay saying, or pointing out, I think somebody else had said, that your father never really analyzed society. He knew right from wrong, good from bad, but he didn't really analyze social questions about the source of wealth or how you deal with inequality. We needn't go into the essay as such, but questions of schooling are fundamental, and especially in Britain, with the private schooling system, which has entrenched the inequalities that your father wrote about so graphically and powerfully.
Yes, I agree. I guess in many ways, he might have analysed that a bit more had he survived. I mean, after he was only 46, he probably would have had many thoughts about such matters had he lasted another 10, 15, 20 years. I think he just simply went back to the private education as a default point, because that's where he started from. Whether he would have given it a deeper thought later on, who knows? That's my defence and my answer, I'm afraid. Inadequate though it may be, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Douglas Kerr, please.
Thank you so much for that talk. I've got a small question. I believe that no recording survives of your father's voice.
That's correct.
And I wonder if you remember his voice and if you can describe it.
No, I really, that is the one regret, I suppose, that I have. I'm always talking to Avril, people from years and years and years ago, because he'd been injured in the throat, shot through the throat. He had a rather weak voice and slightly high-pitched, I believe, but I'm not sure. I know that David Taylor is still trying to tip the BBC upside down to try and find a recording, because David Taylor is going to do another biography. And so he's still searching, but whether he'll ever find one, I don't know. But yes, he didn't have a very, very strong voice. And I don't have it in my mind. I cannot reproduce it in my mind, what his voice sounded like, I'm afraid. So sorry, Douglas, to disappoint you. I can't give you anything particularly concrete.
Thanks a lot.
Keith, please. Keith Lloyd.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Keith.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Richard. We were lucky enough to go with you to Barnhill a few years ago, and that was a wonderful experience. My father was a plumber, and I used to help him during the school holidays when I was a very young boy. What do you remember about your father being a writer? Did that sort of occur to you that it was something special?
I was trying to find myself. Yes, I suddenly keep on moving around. He kept himself to himself when he was writing. He would be up, as I think probably if you remember, when we went through Barnhill, up in his, or not his bedroom, the bedroom that he occupied at the time, and he conducted all his writing there. He may have done some writing down in the sitting room. I'm not sure, but most of it was done in that bedroom. And he kept it compartmentalized in the sense that he didn't come downstairs and discuss it with anybody. So I don't, my recollections would have been with him outside the bedroom.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Very good. Who'd like to ask a question? We've run through the queue now. If there's anybody else would like to ask a question, please let me know now, or we'll let Richard go and have his dinner.
No, he's going to have a drink first.
Oh, very good.
There's a question.
That is not gin and tonic. It is water.
Ariane Banks has her hands up.
Oh,
Ben.
So it's a member, Ariane Banks has her hand up there.
Oh, Ariane, please, yes. Good evening to you. Nice to see you.
I can see you.
Thanks, Richard. I love that talk, and I love the photos you showed us. I just wondered whether by any chance you remember anything about Inez Holden, who I know came up. You were a very small boy at the time, but she came up to help with the harvest in 1948. I think she came a couple of times, actually, and she was a great friend of your father's.
Yes. I'm sorry to say I don't recall. I have no recollection of her. And the only reason I would know that she was there is because it is mentioned. If you trawl through all the domestic diaries, biographies, so on and so forth, yes, her name does turn up. And but I don't recall her, I'm afraid. Sadly, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't think you would. It was a long shot.
Yes.
Very good. Richard Keeble, please.
Hello, Richard.
Oh, you're there. Yes, you're hiding.
Yes, I'm sorry, my camera's not working.
All right, well, I'll forgive you.
Good. You are, of course, included in the great novel, 1984, because the age of Winston Smith in that is 39, which is the age you would have been in 1984. So it's a very beautiful, subtle way in which he incorporates you into that novel. Of course, he incorporates your mother in another way, the title, etc. But the question is, your involvement in the memory and remembering of Orwell, you went many years without really being terrifically involved in that. And I'd like you maybe to talk about how you came to change in a way, your attitude towards the memory in launching the society, etc. As a professional, did you deliberately keep away from all the Orwellian mania?
Oh, well, yeah, not consciously, Richard. I suppose really because I was working. I didn't have time. I didn't have the time to devote to such matters. And it was only once I'd really fully retired. I'd sold the business in Craignish back in the late 2008, 2009, that really I had the opportunity for church curiosity, of course, brought up by Dione Venables, who at that time, in about 2003, 4, 5, was putting forward the notion that there should be an Orwell Society. And of course, I was in a position by then to kind of concentrate and devote myself in that direction. So up till then, I had been I simply didn't have the time.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have someone here who's Richard. We have hundreds of Richards, so I don't know which Richard it is who's got their hand up. So they've not got a surname.
It's Richard Lanigan.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Richard, great talk. That was brilliant. Took me back to 2018 on our visit to Jura. On that visit, Mr. Fletcher had found an old motorbike or an old motorbike frame, and I think he was hoping that it may have been your father's.
Yes, well,
do you have anything about it? Is it?
Well,
I think he was hoping in vain. Sorry, Richard. I think that was a that was a bit of a red herring.
We have Dennis Frost, who's a real expert. One of our members is a real expert on vintage motorbikes. Identified that it was a different make, and it certainly wasn't the Orwell's, I'm afraid.
I think he'll be very disappointed in that one, I think.
Well, life is full of disappointments occasionally.
That's a fact. That's a fact. But thanks very much for this evening.
Not at all. You're more than welcome.
Well, if anybody would like to hear one or two more insights into Richard's time on Jura, on February the 5th, Richard and I were interviewed by Claudia and Uta. Claudia is an expert in Vienna on internet and other forms of privacy in this day and age. And we learnt, to our surprise, that the white knight people who hack on the website, on people's websites, who point out problems for people rather than exploiting those problems, Orwell apparently is a bit of a hero. That interview is now available on our website. So I would encourage you to go and learn a bit more from that if you're interested. Let's make this the last question. Norrie, please.
Norrie from Ling.
Norrie, where are you?
Here I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Norrie. Good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Richard and Eleanor. I thoroughly enjoyed your talk and was very intrigued by the new photographs you brought out, especially of the boat. It was much smaller than I had imagined it. So that was very interesting, and you could see how it would overturn easily in the quarry when it was running. My question is, how aware were you of how ill your father was when you were visiting him down at Cranham and at UCL Hospital? I know you asked him various questions, but how clear were you that he was very ill indeed? Or
I had no way of knowing how ill he was, because when I went to see him at Cranham, Norrie, I would say, well, where does it hurt, Daddy? So I was looking for some physical manifestation of his pain and illness, and of course, it was internal, and you couldn't see it. And of course, it probably didn't occur to me that he was becoming more cadaverous as time went on. And so it kind of mystified me, and then presumably my thoughts wandered off somewhere else. So it was sadly I didn't realize how ill he really was. And I guess when I saw him in hospital in UCL, I have no recollection. I do vaguely recall going to London at that time, but have no recollection of seeing him in hospital.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you think it influenced his account of the torture that he saw, that Winston suffered in 1984?
Well, there is the $64,000 question, Norrie. What is the answer to it? I do not know whether it was an influence or not.
Okay.
I would like to think it wasn't, that he would have written it thus, whatever state of his health was.
Yeah.
Well, he might have been influenced by the stories my father would have told him about his suffering in Spain.
Yeah. That wouldn't, yes, that wouldn't have helped, would it? Or would have helped, depending on which way you want to look at it. Yeah.
Well, it's been, I'm sure everybody agrees, a wonderful evening. I would be grateful if you'd all unmute yourselves and say thank you to Rick in a normal way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.